The first thing folks remembered about that far and wild land was the sound of the wind. Rolling over the open plains like it carried voices from long ago, travelers said the nights were colder there, the days hotter, and the silence heavier than anywhere else beneath the wide American sky. It was the kind of land where every mountain seemed carved with a warning, and every river carried the memory of those who once fought to protect it. People crossing that region always heard one particular tale whispered near campfires, in trading posts, and inside dusty barns when lantern light flickered. It was not about gold, nor cattle, nor stolen treasures. It was about one Apache warrior whose strength became a legend bigger than the land itself. A man whose presence turned even the toughest frontiersmen quiet. No one knew for sure when he first appeared, but stories claimed he had survived trials that would have ended most men before they reached adulthood. He grew up where survival had no shortcuts, where every sunrise demanded courage, and every sunset tested resolve. Some said he trained his body to run beside horses without getting tired, to climb cliffs with no rope, and to carry weights that made other young men fall. Others claimed that his strength was not just in his muscles, but in his spirit, shaped by loss, hunger, weather, and war. To many, he was a living symbol of the fierce Apache strength and honor. A warrior gifted by nature and sharpened by hardship, people passing through the land told stories that no soldier, outlaw, or hunter ever wanted to face him. Ranchers whispered that if he ever looked a man in the eyes, that man felt his heartbeat slow and his courage fade. One story told that a group of armed riders once tried to ambush him near a canyon. They were known troublemakers, feared across several towns. Folks said he did not run, did not shake, did not scream, and did not negotiate. He fought with such precision and power that by sunrise, the canyon was quiet again. After that day, his name spread far beyond tribal lands, and he was no longer spoken of as a man, but as a storm. Some travelers tried to claim he was nothing but a tale, yet none of them dared speak against his legend when night fell. Mothers warned their sons never to provoke prideful men, especially men who carried strength like fire beneath their skin. Merchants selling supplies lowered their voices every time his name was mentioned, like he might be standing behind the next shadow. Soldiers passing through added extra guards even if they were nowhere near Apache territory. Farmers who normally bragged about their rifles and hunting skills looked at the ground when talk of him began. No one wanted to be the fool who challenged someone the land itself seemed to respect, but every legend has another side, part no one notices until a different kind of truth walks into the story. Far away from tribal borders, there lived a young woman who never cared much for frightening tales. She did not spend her nights fearing warriors or beasts of the wilderness. She was raised with hardship too, but hers came in a quieter form. She grew up working the fields, learning to guide horses, patch torn clothing, mend fences, and carry water longer than her arms wished to. Life taught her to endure more than she showed, and to keep hope alive even when storms stayed longer than sunshine. People knew her as calm and respectful, but those who looked deeper could see something else in her eyes, something that did not bend easily. She might have looked gentle on the outside, but there was a kind of hidden strength inside her that life had forged slowly. Her journey began the day her family lost what they treasured most. A sudden tragedy forced her to leave the place she called home. Without looking back, she packed only what she could carry, knowing the rest belonged to the past. Some said she left because she wanted to find safety. Others said she wanted answers. And a few guessed she wanted to prove something not even she could explain. She traveled alone because no one nearby was willing to help. They feared what path she was taking, for she traveled toward Apache territory, where that legendary warrior was last seen. People warned her many times. They stood in her way, begged her to think twice, and reminded her of every terrifying rumor they ever heard about him. No one could understand why she kept moving forward. They told her that facing hunger, weather, and wild animals was dangerous enough, but meeting someone like him was another story entirely. Some thought she was brave, others believed she was out of her senses, and a few whispered that fate was using her for a reason no human could fully understand. During her journey, she rested in abandoned cabins, slept near rivers, and ate whatever she could find or trade. While others might have turned back, She kept reminding herself that life rarely offered comfort to those who needed it most. Along the way, she heard more stories about him. One man described how the warrior once lifted a fallen log that 10 men could not move. Another claimed he saw him jump across a wide gorge like the earth itself helped him. A soldier even confessed he had been close enough to hear the warrior's voice and said it sounded like someone who had seen too. Many losses to fear anything anymore. The more she heard, the more her curiosity grew, but so did her understanding that strength alone did not make a person dangerous. She began believing that true danger came from those who misused their power, not those who carried it with discipline. There was something about this warrior that felt unfinished, like his story was holding back a truth no one dared to discover. She realized that sometimes the world builds legends to hide what the heart of a man could really be. Days later, she reached the lands where only the bold stepped. The trees grew taller there, the wind spoke louder, and the silence seemed heavier than anything she had known. She walked slowly, making sure every step showed respect. She did not want to appear as a trespasser, but as someone seeking more than safety. When the sun began to set, she saw smoke rising from a camp far ahead. Her heartbeat quickened. Not with fear, but with the sense that her journey had reached the line where turning back was no longer possible. As she drew closer, she finally saw him. He stood alone, sharpening a spear near a fire, his body carved like stone shaped by storms, carrying a presence that made the whole place feel smaller. Many would have run the moment his eyes lifted, but she did not move. She took one slow breath, stepped forward, and met his gaze without trembling. He stared at her as if measuring something unseen, something deeper than words or strength. For the first time in his life, the legendary warrior found someone who did not shake or bow when looking at him. Someone who walked through fear instead of away from it. Her voice was calm when she spoke, but before she could say more, he tightened his grip on the spear, and the fire crackled louder. As if the land held its breath. No one knew what would happen next, because the story was only beginning. She stood a few steps away from the warrior, unsure if she should speak again or wait for him to make the next move. The flames danced between them, shining against his strong features. And she noticed that his expression did not carry anger or surprise, only watchful silence. She had walked so far and faced so many lonely nights that turning back now would feel like surrender, so she kept her eyes steady. The warrior finally lowered the spear tip, not in trust, but to show that he was willing to listen. The wind blew across the camp and made the long horse ropes rattle like they were warning both of them that nothing here was safe. The woman did not know the full language of his people, but she understood enough signs to show she came in peace. She raised both hands slowly, then placed them at her sides, letting him see she carried no weapon. The Apache warrior did not speak for a long time, and she understood that his silence was not carelessness, but judgment. He needed to know if she was a threat, a spy, a traveler who might bring trouble, or someone who had come for reasons she could not speak yet. She felt the weight of his gaze, as if he was trying to see inside her heart, rather than simply studying her face. He finally said a short question in a deep voice, asking why she had crossed into land where outsiders rarely survived. His tone was not loud, but it carried authority. She answered with honesty because she sensed that lies would not travel far here. She told him that her life had changed and she had nowhere left to go. She explained that she was searching for purpose, a new path, or even guidance, though she was not sure exactly what she truly expected to find. When she mentioned loss, his eyes shifted slightly, not enough for anyone else to notice, but enough for her to sense that he understood the meaning behind her words. Pain was something no one needed to translate. He stepped back and motioned for her to follow. Though her presence near the camp did not mean she was welcome yet, she saw several handmade items around the fire, animal skins drying, stones that looked shaped for tools, and a nearby shelter built from wood and hides. Even without speaking his story, she could see that he lived a life of discipline and survival, not comfort. She wondered how many years he had lived alone, or if he still had a tribe somewhere hidden in the mountains. But asking without permission felt dangerous, so she kept her curiosity under control. She took a seat on the ground where he pointed, and he sat across from her but not too close. His eyes moved from her hands to her boots and then to her face again, studying every detail. She felt the cold ground beneath her and the warmth of the fire against her cheeks. The silence stretched long, not awkward but heavy with unspoken history. She thought of turning her gaze away to escape the intensity of his attention, but something told her not to break eye contact. Leaving would show weakness, while remaining steady might earn her a chance to stay alive. After a while, he told her that people did not come here unless they were running or hunting. He said that outsiders usually carried greed or anger, and nothing good for his people ever came from such travelers. His words made her understand that he had seen more betrayal than kindness. She told him that she did not want anything except a safe place to breathe and time to find her next direction in life. She explained that she was not seeking riches, land, or power. When she spoke, he observed her every move, trying to measure if her voice matched her truth. He finally stood up and walked toward the darkness, leaving her by the fire but not abandoned. She was unsure if that was trust or a test, so she did not move and did not call out. When he returned, he brought a small animal skin and placed it near her so she would not freeze. She thanked him softly, and he nodded once, but did not speak. Something inside her understood that his kindness was rare and she should handle it with respect. She pulled the skin closer around her shoulders, grateful for warmth after so many cold nights. She watched him move with calm precision, every step quiet, every action meaningful. She could see how his body strength came from constant labor, not pride. His hands were marked by work rather than decoration. She realized that he was not a man shaped by the stories people told, but by something deeper. Maybe the world feared him because it had no understanding of strength that did not bow to common rules. The next morning she woke to the sound of birds and felt the warmth of sunlight rising through the mountains. He was already awake, sharpening a blade made from stone and bone. She stood slowly, unsure if she should help or wait for direction. He pointed to a stream nearby, showing her where she could wash her face and drink fresh water. She walked there alone, feeling the cool air filling her lungs. The land looked untouched, pure, held together by silence and old memories. When she returned, he asked if she could work. She replied that she had lived most of her life doing physical labor, so she was not afraid of it. Her answer seemed to interest him, and he handed her some tasks, testing her instead of trusting her. She helped gather dry branches, moved stones, and worked without complaint. He watched quietly, noticing that she did not ask how long or why. She simply worked with steady hands. As the days passed, she began to sense that there was much more to him than what people repeated around towns. He carried scars that were not only on his skin, but inside his spirit. Though he spoke very little, she noticed how he paid close attention to every sound in the forest, how he sensed danger before it came, how he respected the animals and land more than many respected other humans. She wondered what he had lost, or whom he once fought beside, and why he now lived away from them. Meanwhile, she carried her own questions that she was not ready to share. She wondered if she could stay long enough to heal from what happened, or if he would send her away before she found her purpose. She felt safe near him, but also aware that safety did not mean comfort. She sensed that he was still deciding what to do with her, whether she was temporary or meant to stay. His silence made it difficult to know. One evening, when the sky burned orange with sunset, he finally spoke more than a few words. He said that outsiders had brought harm to his people, forcing them to defend what was theirs. He said he had lost more than most men could survive. His voice did not crack, but she heard the hidden weight beneath it. She realized that his strength was not something he bragged about. It was something he had been forced to build in order to stay alive. Hearing those words opened a quiet space between them. Not friendship yet, but a bridge built from small truth. She wanted to tell him her story, but her voice felt too small and her wounds too fresh. She only said that she understood loss, and for the first time, he looked at her differently, as if he believed she was not here for foolish reasons. But even so, he did not let his guard fall. He had lived too long to trust easily. That night, the wind carried a strange sound that made him rise instantly. He motioned for her to stay still. She watched his face change from calm to alert, his eyes narrowing. She sensed danger near, though she could not hear what he heard. He stepped into the shadows and disappeared behind the tall trees while she waited, holding her breath, unsure if she should hide, run, or stay exactly where she was. The night grew colder, the fire burned lower, and she sat with every heartbeat echoing like a drum in her ears. She did not know if the threat was animal, human, or something larger. All she knew was that the man she had trusted to watch over this land had vanished into the darkness, leaving her unsure whether she would see him again or face what awaited her alone. The night stretched on as she waited beside the dying fire, listening for any sign of the warrior's return. The wind whispered through the tall grass, brushing against the hides of the shelter, and every small sound made her tense. She had never been this far from familiar land, and now she sat on the edge of a place where danger was part of the air itself. She wanted to call his name, but she stopped herself. If he had taught her anything in the short time she had been near him, it was that noise could bring trouble faster than anything else. So she stayed still, gripping the animal's skin around her shoulders and trying to quiet her thoughts as the minutes turned into hours. Her mind wandered back to the life she had left behind. She remembered the day everything changed, when the farm she worked so hard to keep standing fell into the wrong hands. The man who claimed her family's land did not look at her with fairness or mercy. He only saw advantage. She tried to fight it at first, thinking she could appeal to justice. But in that corner of the old American frontier, justice was something only the powerful could afford. When she realized she was outnumbered and outmatched, she made the hard choice to leave before she became another story whispered in regret. That journey led her toward the Apache lands, toward a warrior whose strength was spoken about more than any lawman's badge. A branch snapped in the dark and she jerked upright. Her breath stopped. She could not see anything beyond the faint glow of the fire. Her heart raced, thinking of wolves or mountain lions, but she sensed something else. She forced herself to breathe slowly and stay low, and in the silence she finally heard footsteps. Not animal ones, human. She stiffened and held her breath as the figure stepped into the faint light. Relief washed over her when she saw the familiar shape of the warrior. But something was different. His breathing was heavier, and he scanned the camp with sharper eyes, as if the shadows now carried secrets she was not prepared to understand. He looked at her and motioned for silence. She nodded and watched as he moved to the fire, tossing in a handful of dry twigs to bring the flames back to life. Only then did he sit, but not with the ease he normally showed. His posture stayed alert, ready. She knew better than to ask questions without permission, but the worry inside her made it difficult to stay silent. After a long moment, he finally spoke, just a few words, enough to tell her that someone or something had entered the land that should have been untouched. He said he had seen tracks near the ridge, fresh ones that did not belong to his people or any nearby tribe. The prints carried the weight of riders, possibly 3 or 4, moving in a pattern that suggested scouting rather than travel. He did not name them, but she understood. Outlaws, men who moved between towns, taking what they wanted, disappearing before anyone could catch them. Men who followed their own rules and attacked without warning. She had seen such men before and knew the trouble they carried. If they were near, it meant danger was coming, not just for her, but for him as well. He studied her face and told her that she should stay hidden during daylight. If the riders were searching for something or someone, they might circle back. She did not argue. She knew that survival in this land depended on listening to those who understood it. Still, a part of her felt guilty that danger might follow her. She wondered if the men who took her family's land had sent scouts after her. Or maybe the trouble here had nothing to do with her at all. Maybe the warrior had enemies she could not imagine. Either way, they were now caught in the same storm. As the next day arrived, the warrior led her deeper into the forest, into a place where the trees grew thicker and the ground softened with leaves. He showed her a hiding place near a cluster of tall rocks. She crouched there, understanding that this was not just protection for her, but a way to keep the land's secrets safe. He moved like someone who could hear danger before it showed itself. She admired the calm way he guided her, not with gentleness exactly, but with care built from experience. Hours passed in the hidden place. She tried to stay calm, listening to the sound of the wind brushing through the branches. At one point she heard distant hooves, slow and cautious. She pressed herself against the cold rock and prayed they would pass. Through the trees, she caught sight of riders moving in a line. They wore worn coats, carried rifles, and looked like men who had left trouble behind only to search for more. She stayed so still that her legs cramped, watching as they moved from tree to tree, scanning the land with narrow eyes. One rider pointed toward the direction of the camp, and her breath caught in her throat. She wanted to run to warn the warrior, but any movement now would give her away. She dug her nails into her palms and waited until the riders finally disappeared behind the ridge. Only when the forest grew quiet again did she slowly ease out her breath. When the warrior returned later, she could see he already knew. He had tracked them from another angle, watching how they searched. He looked at her like he was trying to decide whether she was connected to these men, or if fate had simply placed them in the same path. He finally told her that the riders were not hunting her. They were after something that belonged to them, something stolen weeks ago. She asked if he knew what it was, and he only said that the men had become desperate. Desperate men were the most dangerous kind. She felt the tension building like heat against her skin. This place had once felt untouched, protected, but now the air felt fragile. She wondered if the warrior would send her away for the sake of safety. She wondered if he believed she would only bring more risk, instead of leaving her behind. He led her to a new shelter deeper in the mountains. It was rough and hidden, built between stones that blended with the earth. She could tell he had used it before, maybe during harsh winters or battles. It felt like a place only he knew, and he shared it with her. That alone made her understand that she had crossed a line. She was no longer a stranger passing through. Her presence now mattered in ways she did not yet understand in the days that followed. She learned more about him without him saying much. She saw how he watched the land like it was part of him, how he listened for danger in the smallest shift of wind. He taught her how to move quietly, how to track footprints, how to understand animals' reactions to threats. He never called it teaching, but she learned anyway. She found herself wanting to help him protect the land, wanting to stand beside him rather than hide behind him. But the tension grew each day. The riders did not leave. They circled the mountains, searching for clues. They camped at night near the river and moved again at sunrise. The warrior followed them from a distance, studying their direction and their intent. She watched him leave in silence and return with shadows in his eyes. Something heavy rested on his mind, something he did not speak yet. One night, he returned with a torn piece of cloth. It belonged to one of the riders. He placed it beside the fire and stared at it for a long time. She could see anger in the tightness of his jaw. When she asked what was wrong, he did not answer at first. Then, he finally said that the riders had taken something from his people long ago, something sacred that should never have left their land. Now the men were back, trying to reclaim a piece they had lost while still planning to take more. She felt the weight of his words. The conflict was no longer about strangers threatening them. It was about history, wounds that ran deeper than anything she had known. She realized that the warrior was preparing for something dangerous and unavoidable. She feared what would happen if the riders found the truth they were after. She feared the fight that would come because she knew the warrior would never back down. The forest grew quieter over the next few days. But she sensed it was not peace. It was the silence before something broke. She found herself waking in the middle of the night, feeling watched even though no one was there. She noticed the warrior sharpening weapons with more focus, moving with sharper awareness, as if waiting for a strike he knew was coming. Then, one evening, as the sky dimmed and the fire glowed faintly, the warrior turned toward her with a look that made her heart tighten. He said the riders were close again, closer than before. He said the time for hiding was almost over. She felt her breath thin, knowing that whatever storm was coming, they were standing in the center of it. But before she could ask what he planned, a distant shout echoed through the mountains, followed by the crack of a rifle. The sound rolled through the night air like thunder. The danger they feared had finally found them. Rifle shot echoed across the mountains and bounced off the stone walls like a warning. That could not be ignored. She felt the air around her tighten, as if the world itself had stopped breathing for a moment. The Apache warrior shifted into action before she could form a single word. His movements were silent and fast, yet controlled. Like someone who had lived his entire life preparing for moments such as this. He signaled for her to stay behind the rocks and made sure she understood without needing to speak. She nodded, but her heart pounded so hard she feared it might give her away. The night sky dimmed as clouds slid across the stars, making the forest darker and more unsettling. She placed her hand against the cold stone and tried to steady herself. She wanted to believe she was safe, but safety felt like a fragile thing in these mountains now. She strained her ears, trying to hear what he heard, but she could only catch the faint sound of distant footsteps, gravel shifting, and hushed voices. Whoever was out there was moving with purpose, not fear. They were closing in. The warrior's form disappeared into the brush, swallowed by shadows like he belonged to them. She wanted to stay calm, but worry pushed into her thoughts. She remembered all the stories told about him, the unmatched strength, the courage, and the quiet fire that burned inside him. Yet she also now understood that even strong men could not fight fate alone. She wondered if he had expected this day, if he knew one day his past would rise like smoke and force him to face something no one else could see. Minutes dragged on without his return. She knelt lower, trying to protect herself from sight, but her heart clung to the hope that he would come back soon. The silence that followed did not feel natural. It was too quiet, like the world was preparing for something that could not be undone. She thought of running, but she could not abandon the person who had given her shelter when everyone else closed their doors. She stayed, even though fear tried to convince her otherwise. Suddenly, she felt a presence behind her. She turned slowly, her breath caught in her throat, but it was only him. He crouched beside her and whispered that the riders were now only a short distance away. He said they had split into 2 groups, which made it harder to track them all at once. He looked straight into her eyes, as if trying to judge whether she could face what was coming. She saw no panic in his gaze, only focus. But she could sense that this time the danger was serious enough, that even he needed to prepare differently. He handed her a small stone knife, not for attack, but for protection, telling her only to use it if there was no other way. She accepted it with a shaky hand, but a determined heart. Then he told her something that sent chills through her body. He said that if the riders reached this hidden spot, it would not be a chance encounter. It would mean they knew exactly where they were. That meant there was something far deeper behind their search. He moved silently toward the edge of the shelter and peered into the forest. She followed his gaze and thought she saw shadows moving between the trees, low and deliberate. A faint glow from a torch appeared between branches, then disappeared, then reappeared again. She held her breath and hid deeper in the rocks, praying they would pass. But the glow grew brighter, and she could hear voices now. They were too close. The warrior motioned for her to stay hidden and slipped out into the darkness. She clutched the knife, cold against her skin, and tried to focus on breathing. She closed her eyes for a moment and remembered the day she lost everything. She reminded herself that she did not survive that nightmare, just to fall here without a fight. A sudden crash from deeper in the forest made her eyes fly open. She heard angry shouting, boots pounding the ground, and branches breaking. Someone yelled about finding tracks. The riders had confirmed they were close. The warrior returned quickly and told her they had only moments. He lifted his spear and pulled a handmade bow from a hidden place under a rock. His muscles tensed like a bowstring. He told her again to remain where she was no matter what she heard. She wanted to disagree, to argue that she would not leave him to fight alone, but he placed his hand on her shoulder for the first time. The look in his eyes said that protecting her was now part of his purpose. She lowered her gaze and nodded in silent promise. The riders broke through the trees soon after, shouting at each other as they searched. There were at least 5 of them now, not 3 like they believed earlier. Their coats were worn, and their voices were rough. They carried rifles and knives, and 2 of them held ropes like they intended to take prisoners, not simply scare people away. She crouched lower, wishing she could melt into the rocks. She heard one of them say that they were sure the stolen item was somewhere in this area. Another swore that the person who took it must be close. Their anger spread like smoke. One rider began smashing branches with his rifle, trying to scare out anything hiding. Then the warrior stepped from behind a tree, silent as the night itself. The riders froze, stunned by his sudden appearance. They had heard stories too, and even outlaws respected legends. Their hesitation did not last long, though. Pride and greed always burned stronger than sense. One man shouted for him to hand over what belonged to them. The warrior did not flinch. They threatened him, claiming they would search every inch of the mountain, whether he agreed or not. He did not respond, only shifted his stance, ready for whatever came. Tension cracked like dry wood. One rider raised his weapon. Before he could take aim, the warrior knocked him off his feet with a swift strike. The others scrambled, yelling and pointing their rifles. She pressed herself deeper into the shelter, shaking, afraid to watch but unable to close her eyes. The fight erupted like a storm. The warrior moved with remarkable strength and skill. His speed made it clear why no one had ever dared to challenge him. But these riders were not like others. They fought like desperate men, willing to risk everything. One of them managed to knock him down with a blow to the shoulder. She gasped, but covered her mouth to stay silent. The warrior got up again, but she could see blood on his skin. 2 more riders circled him, swinging rifles like clubs. He defended himself, but 5 against 1 was not a fair match, not even for a man of his strength. She felt her heart twisting as the struggle grew fiercer. She knew she could not sit like a helpless shadow forever. Fear tried to pull her back, but something stronger pushed her forward. She stepped out from the hiding place, her hands trembling but her voice steady as she shouted for them. To stop, all eyes turned to her. The warrior's face changed. He had wanted her safe, hidden, untouched by this conflict. But she was no longer a frightened traveler. She stood between them, even though she was unarmed, except for the small knife. Her voice shook as she told them there had been enough loss already. The riders stared at her, confused by her presence. But then something else happened. One of them recognized her. His eyes widened, and he whispered that she was the woman who had run from the farmland dispute. She froze, shocked that her story had traveled so far. Her past had seeped into this conflict, tying their fates closer than she ever imagined. The warrior tightened his grip. Knowing now that their enemies had more reason than assumed, the riders smirked with growing confidence, believing they now held the advantage. Not through strength, but through information. The air tightened more than ever, and she felt the world closing in. No one moved. The wind held its breath. Then one of the riders lifted his rifle and pointed it directly at her. Everything balanced on a fragile edge. The rifle aimed at her chest, seemed to freeze time. But she felt clarity instead of panic. She knew she could not outrun bullets or overpower trained men. What she could do was speak, and she trusted that truth could strike deeper than fear. She lifted her chin a little and told them she left her old home not because she ran from guilt, but because she refused to live under people who believed power made them owners of others. She said she would never take what was not hers, and she did not know what they were searching for, but she would not stand aside and let more lives be broken by greed. Her words made one of the riders hesitate. His grip loosened slightly, as if her courage cracked the story he had built inside his mind. The leader barked at him to stay focused, but doubt was now present. The warrior, still hurt but steady, stepped in front of her just enough to shield her without pushing her aside. He raised his voice with calm authority and told them that strength is not proven by taking, but by protecting. He said the item they wanted was not stolen, but recovered, because it belonged to his ancestors and had been taken from them long before any argument over land or money began. The leader shouted that it was worth more than any tribal memory. That short sentence revealed everything: greed, pride, and blindness. The other riders looked at their leader as if seeing his true motive for the first time. They had been told they were reclaiming property or correcting a wrong, but now they saw they were only tools used for selfish gain. One rider lowered his rifle completely and stepped away, shaking his head in quiet shame. He said he never signed up to harm innocent people or to disrespect sacred land. Another rider followed, stating he wanted no part in this fight anymore. Conflict had cracked open truth, and truth had forced choices. Only 2 remained loyal to the leader. and they shifted uncomfortably, seeing their numbers fall and their reason weakened. The leader grew angrier, raising his rifle higher, using rage to hold on to control. But anger could not hide the fear in his eyes. The warrior spoke again, telling them that if they continued on this path, they would gain nothing except regret. He explained that the sacred item had already been returned to its rightful place deep within the mountains. Not to be sold or used, but honored. No man there could profit from it anymore. Hearing this, the leader's face twisted with frustration. He felt his journey was wasted, his mission failed, and pride demanded someone pay for that loss. He aimed again, but before he could pull the trigger, one of his own former allies stepped forward and knocked the rifle upward. The gun fired toward the sky, sending birds scattering but hurting no one. The leader swore loudly and tried to fight the man who stopped him. But his anger was no match for teamwork now standing against him. Within moments, the last two followers left his side and backed away, tired of being commanded by someone who valued wealth more than honor. The leader was left alone, breathing hard, eyes wild, realizing he could not win. He ran into the forest, disappearing into darkness, leaving behind everything he came to control. The quiet that followed was heavy, but peaceful. The threat had finally passed. She released a long breath she did not realize she had been holding, and the warrior slowly lowered his spear. The remaining riders apologized, admitting they were misled and never intended to cause real harm. They promised to leave the mountains and start fresh somewhere else, away from stolen missions and untrue leaders. The warrior did not threaten them. Instead, he reminded them to remember what they had seen here. Strength was not what they originally believed. They nodded in respect, and before leaving, they made sure to throw their ropes and stolen items into the fire. A final sign that their part in this story had ended. When they were gone, silence returned, but it no longer felt like fear. The forest seemed to breathe again, and the sky slowly cleared, letting the stars shine through. She turned to look at the warrior and saw not just strength, but a tired soul relieved that the past no longer weighed as heavily. She thanked him for protecting her even when it put him at risk. He told her quietly that she had protected him too, not with weapons, but with courage that refused to run. Without her presence and voice, the riders might never have questioned their purpose. He walked her back to the hidden shelter, where she carefully cleaned his wounded shoulder with cool water. She took gentle care, and he allowed it without resistance, something that showed deep trust. The fire warmed them and cast soft light across the stones. She shared more of her past and finally spoke about the hurt she had carried, the feeling of being powerless. The warrior listened with patience and understanding, telling her that sometimes being forced away from where we once belonged is not loss, but a turning point to where we are meant to stand in the next days. They rebuilt the camp and gathered food together. She learned more survival skills, and he learned that companionship did not weaken strength, it strengthened purpose. She asked him one morning if he would ever return to his tribe. He looked toward the mountains and said that some paths close forever, but some open again when hearts are ready. She knew his answer left room for hope, not sorrow. Spring slowly reached the mountains, waking the land with new colors. As time passed, she did not feel like a lost traveler anymore. She felt like her life had been given back to her, piece by piece, rebuilt by honesty, bravery, and respect. She helped plant new seeds near the camp, speaking with a smile that she wanted the ground to show something living again. The warrior joined her, placing his hands in the soil, and said that the strongest roots come from places where storms once hit hardest. Travelers, passing through months later, spoke of seeing smoke in the mountains and hearing laughter near the river. Some claimed they saw a tall warrior walking beside a woman who moved with quiet strength. Both carrying baskets instead of weapons, they said the land around them looked safer, calmer, like it had chosen them to protect it. The story spread not as a warning, but as inspiration. People no longer whispered that no one could match the strength of the Apache warrior. Instead, they said that his true power was not his muscles, but his heart, and the woman who dared to face him without fear became part of the strength that could not be defeated in time. They built a small home from stone, clay, and wood. Not hidden, but surrounded by nature. They lived with respect for the land and for each other. She finally felt she belonged somewhere again. And he no longer carried the weight of loneliness. Their story became a quiet legend told around campfires, reminding others that real strength comes from honoring what is right, protecting what is sacred, and believing that even the most wounded souls can build a new beginning. And that is how the land kept their footsteps. Not as strangers, but as part of its living history.